Kia ora koutou. Thank you. Good afternoon. Hello, Andy. This is the first time for us to do this in a mixed reality or hybrid setting. We hope everything will work fine. For Andy, it's evening in Washington, and I hope everything is fine there.
Yeah, it's going okay.
That's great. So I think then we can switch to the slides. Woo. So our talk is titled Games for Resilience, which I had the feeling stands out a little bit compared to the other presentations. And so I hope you can just sit back and relax and listen a little bit while we talk about a very powerful technology, which is often overlooked. And often people don't even know what we are talking about when referring to games or applied games. So we hope that we can enlighten you a little bit and motivate you to look into that technology a little bit. About the Hitlab, the Human Interface Technology Lab, where Andy and me are affiliated to, is the largest interaction lab in New Zealand and located at the University of Canterbury here. We do games there just since last year officially with the Applied Immersive Gaming Initiative, which is funded by the New Zealand government and brought Andy and me to New Zealand, when he's not in America at least, but also is very much connected to our educational program, which is represented today by Simon, Andy, and Sam, who are sitting there somewhere, who are caring for the education of the future talent in this industry. We are looking into all kinds of immersive technologies and every problem or a situation where humans interact with technology. So that can be your mobile phone, but also head-mounted displays, or we are looking into questions why people bully robots, for example. So all kinds of technology where humans interact with them. We are looking into that. The aim of the Applied Immersive Gaming Initiative is to support New Zealand's games industry. Andy and me, we both have a lot of experience in engaging with industry and bringing research and industry together. In both countries, the government acknowledged the games industry as part of the creative industry and its huge revenue production. So we both worked a lot on government grants and also together with industry on really exciting projects, and some of the examples of that work we will bring to you today. As I said, it might be an unusual and very new term, applied immersive games. So what we understand when we talk about these types of games, it's literally games. It's where people play, and where people play a situation, which in that sense is usually based on a realistic model. And these games do have additional purposes than only entertainment. So when you try to kill time and just engage with one of the casual games on your phone, you seek for entertaining and you seek for killing time. When you engage with an applied game, you look for something that can help you in learning, training, or decision-making, for example. That's kind of the difference. And at the Hitlab, we look into technologies, how to increase the immersion, or how to use immersive technologies like augmented reality or virtual reality to even increase the effect of the applied games. The example you see on the slide is a digital game, which is maybe not so highly immersive because it's just a 2D display, but it's based on the realistic model of a large European airport. And it helped decision makers around the airport to make decisions about the right traffic connections to and from the airport. And the good thing about using a game, in addition to, for example, formal models and data analysis, is that people can immediately interact with the games. They get immediate feedback. They are usually very motivated to play the games. And also it highlights usually the human behavior. So while formal models can show you a lot and calculate a lot of data and how a system would work on a very high level usually, a game can also include how humans would respond to a new system, for example, or a new infrastructure. Resilience. So I don't think I have to talk in Christchurch about resilience, because I think you and we are really resilient. But as a very general definition, resilience is the ability to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness, which I think in times of a global pandemic is very important for us as individuals, but also for organizations and societies. And resilience can be applied on an individual, organizational, or societal level. And today, Andy and me brought you some examples on how we can make use of games to support people to increase their resilience. So the first example is from you, Andy.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of work in the space that transcends games and mental health, and working with some both clinical psychologists as well as other members of the medical community, as well as game design researchers. And this is a game that we did for Xbox and Steam a couple of years ago. And it was specifically focused around this idea of feeling squeezed or feeling compressed in dealing with depression and anxiety. And we did a little user study and wrote it up for the Journal of Games and Mental Health. And it has a follow-on piece now in Frontiers in Psychology. But it's basically this notion of how can we use games to get people to elicit certain feelings at precise moments, so that we can begin to put a therapy frame around those interactions. Next slide. And that's some of my own work, but probably the biggest news, being in Washington, probably the biggest news was that the US Food and Drug Administration just this year formally approved the first game for treatment of a medical condition. And this one was specifically around ADHD, but there are also lots of other people engaged in that space trying to figure out how we engage with these things and how we can use them to positive effect. And I also put up the example of Candy Crush. Candy Crush is, of course, a widely popular game, and lots of people play it as a time waster on their phones. But I also saw that it was being used. I met a woman on an airline flight who was flying home, and she was. I noticed it because she was on like level 8,000, which doesn't usually come up that much in Candy Crush. And she was using it as a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. She used to be a fighter pilot and was actually blown out of the sky and had to parachute down and was dealing with all. So every time she flies, this is really difficult. And this was one of the tools that she was using for, shall we say, mental resilience. Next slide. In terms of some other forms of resilience, you can think of resilience as not just fortitude, but also as being able to quickly respond to situations effectively, and being able to put in place practices that continue enabled success. So one of the examples there is an article that I wrote with Heide, which is about what we know about the spread of contagion and plague from the way that has happened in virtual worlds. And that can be very tactically based when you play, if you role play a simulation around the spread of a plague. It can also be evidence-based, where you watch very similar styles of interaction, and then how they bleed and how they're responded to by the people in them. There was a very famous example in World of Warcraft a number of years ago, where there was a sort of a glitch in the game that spread from player to player, and they actually learned a lot about the public response in epidemiology circles by watching what players were doing in these games. The second example there is one that I did as a part of work in the game lab with colleagues of mine. It'll sound silly, but it's actually very timely. It is a game for school-aged children to learn a process to discern between real and fake news. And so we have a bit of an issue with that in America right now. And it's been really interesting. We revised it, of course, for the pandemic. And it's been really interesting because they start out very absurd, right? And they're very easy to tell which is true and which is false. And then as it compresses down and gets more intricate, you have to really start to think about what your process is in internalizing information and in media literacy. And to be able to do that with a game provides some insight because you have all the data analytics behind it around how people make these decisions. And so you can look at scale and start to look for patterns in the way that people are processing particular pieces of media. And then just, as another example of that kind of resilience, I once made a game around faculty politics called Hack, Slash, and Backstab on Xbox. And I did that specifically to point out to colleges and universities that some of the processes that we use to evaluate the effectiveness of professors are based almost entirely on their individual success. And yet we need teams in order to conduct research on all the interesting problems. And so if we're expecting a team to result in success, then why are we only evaluating individuals? And so it was a way for a game to reflect some processes that people hadn't really thought through their long-term effect. And when you play it as a game, they become really apparent really quickly because you can play with rule sets like that and really engage with folks. Thanks. Next slide. I think we're back to you.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's already also a very important aspect that Andy mentioned, as games might be known as learning or training tools or as support tools for decision processes, but they are less known even for supporting researchers. And especially talking about digital games, of course, they are like powerful tools to collect a huge amount of data. And games are used as an additional tool to look into behavior or decisions of players, for example, to better understand possible decisions in situations that people would take, but in a simulated environment. And in the previous talk, you also saw that some of these apps also make use of game elements, because whenever you get a reward for like logging in back into your app, that's basically a game element, and that's also called gamification. So you find these mechanics all over in our daily life, and they show to be really very powerful in all kinds of contexts. I come from Delft University of Technology before joining UC. And there I was, amongst others, part of a really large European research project that looked into technology to make humanitarian aid work more efficient and safer. And I think this is also very relevant to the New Zealand context, not only because we every now and then face natural disasters, but because New Zealand could really be the hub for humanitarian aid response in the Pacific region. What we did here, or how we used game techniques here, was to support the general aim of this project, which was to build a new technology for humanitarian aid workers, which would be a mobile app that combines the tracking of assets and people to make their work more safe, but also including some like communication means, because at the moment when humanitarian aid workers work in disaster or crisis regions, they usually have their mobile phone or a satellite phone and some Excel sheets, and that's it. And then every organization, so the large UN organizations work with different systems than like the smaller NGOs, so it's really like a very unstructured and kind of unorganized response. And this project had the idea to like do some research and development in technology to help the humanitarian aid response. And we used game techniques for the requirements analysis. So we basically developed a board game, which like you might know from sitting down with your children or friends at night and playing Pandemic, for example, or any other board game. And such a game we developed, but in a crisis context. And we asked actual humanitarian aid workers to join us and play through certain scenarios. And that was useful for us as researchers to really understand the needs, because sometimes we just assume that the user would like this or that. But if they really can play through a scenario, that makes it very obvious what they really would need and use and like. As like one of the humanitarian aid workers, when we like confronted them with some advanced technology, they just said to me, like, as long as I have my mobile phone and my gun, I feel safe. I don't need your app. Okay, that's one approach. Once that technology has been built, what often happens in research contexts is that you sit in a very safe environment in your lab, and you try out your app within like the safe environment of a university, and everything works perfectly. And you think, yes, I did a very good job because everything works so perfectly. But then when you like release it into the real world, you see that like the Wi-Fi is not that stable, or users don't use it as you intended them to use your app or whatever technology. So what we did, we used some game mechanics and elements to build a real large scenario, and we asked, again, humanitarian aid workers, but also the technological developers to come to us to Delft and simulated a crisis situation. And the advantage of this participatory approach, I would say, supported by game elements, was that the real users could make use of it in kind of a simulated fields context, and the developers could like observe what happens and could immediately like work with the feedback and improve the system. And that worked really very well and was well received by both like the end users and the tech developers. And that, of course, is not so much an immersive game where we made use of like head-mounted displays and advanced technology for the game, but we made use of game elements for technological development, which was very useful. Another one that Andy already touched upon was also making vulnerable people and vulnerable children more resilient. And in the Hitlab, we are currently looking into how we could use VR and games and combine the two technologies to support children with ADHD and children with autism to better cope with like daily situations and better cope with the formal educational system. Because we see that these children often are challenged by like the attention that is requested by them, or the behavior that is expected, and the social response to certain situations. And because of their disorder, they just can't cope with it. And that has a huge impact on their academic performance. And we see that virtual reality seems to be very promising. This is some examples of a work of a postdoc researcher who is affiliated with our research lab, who built like a VR cage where the children with autism could engage with daily situations and learn what like the correct or desired response and behavior in that situation would be. One of our first concerns when looking into that was whether these children would tolerate the use of a head-mounted display, for example, because it seems to be very invasive and like it's on your face. But studies show that like they can tolerate it quite well. And the advantage of using virtual environments is that you can shut off everything else. And these children often are like really struggling with too much that comes up on them. So if you are able to create really simple environments and really like, literally force them to pay attention to certain situations or to certain elements, that seems to be really promising, and that's something that we are looking into. And that, of course, also touches into the domains of health and education that we are working with at the Hitlab, and which are already quite familiar with the use of simulations and games, which is, of course, also helpful. And yes, also the university is and was impacted by COVID-19. So earlier this year, we had to switch all of our teaching to online teaching. And maybe you also were forced to work from home and engage with your colleagues or employees from home. And we are looking into how to make this a little bit more engaging and easier for people. Because like when I was forced into like the first online lecture, I did like a very traditional lecture telling the students what I would also tell them in a classroom. But then, of course, the energy and the interaction is very different. And I felt that because I was extremely tired after that, because there was nothing that I could read from the audience, which was like 12 cats. That was it. So I think that, like, especially for learning and experience things and trying things out in a very safe environment where we can simulate the real life, but like make it also a little bit more engaging and really challenging and fun and making use of good game elements, can be a really powerful alternative to face-to-face learning. So like engaging with students in face-to-face situations or bringing them out into real field trips, for example, are valuable experiences. And I really say it's an addition, it's not an alternative. And I will not replace like face-to-face learning or engagement. But in times where it's not possible for whatever reason, it's definitely good to look into how to make it more engaging. And also it shows that like using game elements increases the retention rate of persons because like they really engage with the thing. It's learning by doing. And it can enable the transfer of what has been learned better to like the workplace or a real situation because it's a realistic simulation of something. We are looking into how to include it in the educational program at the university, but also at primary and secondary schools. So to conclude, I hope that Andy and me, we could show you a little bit about how games are powerful and interactive means for all sorts of systems, situations, and problems, and how they can make or support people in becoming more resilient. And yeah, we are really happy to like receive your questions, to engage with you, to hear how we could support you or collaborate with you in education and research and work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One question from me first. I have a 7-year-old that's on the ASD spectrum. He's Minecraft and Roblox mad. Could someone create a game that tells him that he has to stop playing after like an hour? Because it becomes a pain for every parent.
It does. Like I'm a mother too. It definitely does. And like there are individuals that are really like, they tend to be addictive. So like gaming disorder is a serious threat, definitely. But even the World Health Organization has acknowledged also the positive power of games, and that what Andy was speaking about. And I think that's like I strongly believe more in the positive energy of games than in the negative threat of it.
So do I. His mother, not so much. A question from Jackie. How are you collating the gaming data? Is this owned by the Hitlab or yourselves, or how do you keep that data?
Yeah, now when we do it for research, we always have to file an application to the ethical committee of the university first. How we treat the individuals, of course, whether there's a power relationship between teacher and students, and how we treat the data. And there we have to come up with a very careful data management plan. So the data is safely stored at the university and belongs to the university, to the Hitlab.
And is it purged after a certain period of time? Or?
That depends on the project.
Right. That makes sense. Jason has, I've jumped ahead. Oh, yeah, we'll go to Jason. What do you think are possible solutions for problematic obsessive gaming by children on games such as Fortnite? Is it simply better parenting, or does there need to be limits on elements like loot boxes that deliberately target psychological triggers, that gamification aspect? Will these problems get worse as retail games get more immersive with VR and AR, in your opinion?
Andy, do you have an answer at hand?
Sure. I guess I would argue that, like I once got this question of it was a talk much like this, and somebody came up right after it and said, well, but once it's in VR, right, like people won't be able to, distinguish like between, reality and not reality, and they're going to do all these crazy things, and then they're going to do them in the real world, and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, we have lots of we have words for people that can't distinguish reality and what happens in the game and what happens in reality. And so I think when you think about like people obsessively doing, say, Fortnite or any of the others, although it's interesting, right? Like, we'll say somebody's obsessively playing Fortnite, and yet if they were running around the woods, playing soldier tag or something, like that would be just fine. And so I think there's a lot of value in sort of like, as a parent, what I try to do is try to structure a day with a bunch of different activities, which is way more difficult, obviously, now in pandemic land, but structure a day with lots of different activities, right? So that children are having the experience of doing multiple different kinds of things and interactions, right? Typically, when I encounter kids that are, super obsessively playing a game, they're usually doing a couple of different things. One is they're learning a lot by engaging with their friends in that community space, and so paying attention to the communication learning that's happening, I think, is pretty important. But two is, a lot of times they're bored, and so finding other creative outlets for them to engage with is also, I think, pretty critical.
Yeah. And I would echo that. It comes down to like educating by example. I think you can't expect like children engaging with like their football outside when you sit on the sofa with your mobile phone in hand. That just doesn't work. Surprise, surprise. But like, I think the educational system should pick it up better. So in like media literacy and like acknowledging games as a really powerful and positive medium, and then like educate the children how to deal with all kinds of media, also with social media, and include it, and then like go out with your child and like pay attention and like give them some of your time.
That's good.
It.
Leon has asked, how can we find a list of games that would be good for learning in schools that don't have a monetary hook? Where would he be best to look?
That's a very good question. There are some alliances, like the Games for Learning Alliance, which is a large European alliance again, that like has a list of games that are not like so business oriented and based on very sound instructional approaches. So look into that, I think. It's.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little depressing right now, although hopefully it gets better again in a month. The U.S. Department of Education used to have a list very much like that until about 4 years ago. So hopefully that comes back. I mean, I'm not, but hopefully we will be investing in those kinds of resources again for public good. And you can also find a lot through, there's a conference in the States called Games for Change. That's another good resource. And there was also a program out of the MacArthur Foundation that was looking at games for learning specifically and cataloged a bunch of them. So if you Google that, you'll be able to read a bunch of their reports from a few years ago.
Yeah, and surprisingly, a lot of larger international organizations have also like good repositories. So the International Red Cross, for example, has a lot of like simple games, which are not digital games, but like games with like low-cost material on their website with all the instructions and all material that you need on it for like different kinds of topics. Like they talk about resilience, for example, or robustness, or disaster response, or whatever, and they are freely available.
That's good. Ian, I'm very impressed. How many people know what Among Us is? Ian does. I was quite surprised. Is Among Us different to other online games, and in your opinion, how? Andy?
Andy.
I mean, there have been other games that have played with that theme before. I think Among Us is just one that hit a particular nerve because we were all playing it online from different locations anyway, given everything else that was happening in the world. It's really well done. But that idea of, find the person that doesn't really belong, that's been a theme in tons of games going way back. I will say my favorite internet meme right now is "Orange is sus." So you can look at what that means in the context of American politics when you want to chuckle.
And now it's interesting because they're making Among Us in real life videos. I was watching one last night with Unspeakable. Jeremy's asked, should we aim for some well-built games for learning over thousands of games built without good learning premise masquerading as learning? Who's building these learning games and what's their motivation?
Yes, please. Build them. So the problem or challenge with that is like when you compare them to entertainment games, which are like global and which have like an almost uncountable audience. They have an also almost uncountable budget behind it. And like if you talk about learning games, they are very often made for a certain region, for a certain group of learners, for a certain language group, for a certain cultural group. So the group of users is very limited, and so is the budget. And some of them, I think, they try to like replicate entertainment games in like their visual appearance, for example, and they don't think so much about like the mechanics and elements of games that work really well. So I would always like recommend to start rather simple and start with the good stories that work in that cultural space and context. And make it engaging with like simple challenges or collaboration elements or these kind of things, and not strive like for the like really huge 3D whatever virtual world, because that is just expensive. And I think a lot of learning games are really poorly and like what we call in that space chocolate-coated broccoli, where like some juicy game elements are put into a place, but like calculation remains calculation of whatever numbers, and like children are really smart. They understand like immediately that this is a bad game, and that demotivates them immediately too, unfortunately. So yeah.
Now, one interesting question from Bill to both of you. How did you end up working at the Hitlab, and how does someone join the team? Do you have a mix of people coming from the gaming industry, mechatronics and subject area specialists, or how has it been built up?
So Annie and me, we came as professors, funded by the New Zealand government, I would say. And the director of the Hitlab, Rob Lindemann, he knew us from the academic community, so he tried to convince us in my case for many years already, and I said no, never, it's so far away. And then we visited as a family in New Zealand, and we fell immediately in love and said, yes, please. So that's how we came into the lab, but we are a research lab, so we work with postgraduate students, which means they do their master program with us for a year, or their PhD studies and work on their research projects together, sometimes with industry. And that can be all sorts of students, so that's the really the thing that I love about the Hitlab. It's really multidisciplinary. So I'm a media and social scientist, but we also have computer scientists, and Andy has a background in computer science and arts. So it's really very diverse. And we have students coming from psychology, arts, mechatronics, and they can come and do a summer internship with us or their master program, master studies. They can also start with my colleagues on a bachelor level and learn about designing proper learning games maybe. So there's all kinds of possibilities to engage with us.
Fantastic. Anything to add, Andy?
I guess I would just underscore the multidisciplinary aspect of the lab. You were talking about learning games earlier, and historically the way that really bad learning games come into existence is you ignore the simple truth that to make a good one, you need both somebody that knows a lot about education and somebody that can design really good games. And typically when like departments of education have tried to fund efforts to build games, they often want to fund great educators, but they don't want to pay for game designers. And when the industry approaches that problem, they approach it from having lots of experience in game design, right? And they'll just like, kind of slap on some stuff around learning at the edges. And that's why you see this sort of trend of not having really deep, rich, focused things in that space. And so I think the model of Hitlab is just super cool because we actually get to engage with folks all across those different fields to try to bring this stuff together and try to learn a little bit more about how this all works.
That's awesome.
And also thanks for having me from DC.
And thanks for joining us. I really do appreciate it. Brent has asked, is that Pura Bay behind you, Andy?
It is, actually. This is a photo that I took when I was in New Zealand, and I use it as my background as a constant reminder that I can't wait to get back.
Nice. Nice. And speaking of Rob, he's put a post in the session chat for anyone that's interested, which this one is not a bad site for maths games. So have a look at hoodamath.com. The link's in there. Ladies and gentlemen, make some noise, please. Thank you very much, Heidi and Andy.